but obviously $1.2 billion is a lot of money that's going back into the hands of people. Hello and welcome to the Neighborhood Money Podcast, a video podcast here to help you build a life you deserve. I'm Cavan, that's Drew, and we are here today kind of just to talk back and forth around some taxes, some potential future tax changes, or even some taxes that might be impacting you pretty soon. We're going to see where this episode goes. It is Labor Day weekend, so we wish you all a very happy long weekend and enjoy the holiday. But Drew, why don't we just dive right into the episode?
Yeah, so when we hear taxes, we're thinking, oh, maybe this can be pretty boring and we don't really want to listen to this. But the reason we're bringing a couple of these items up is they are fairly relevant between the student loan forgiveness, upcoming elections, and just kind of, tax returns in general, especially with if you have your tax return out for an extension right now. That date is coming up here in the middle of this month of September. So anyways, I thought we could start out with the $10,000 loan forgiveness that we've been hearing so much about on TV. And it's been like a federal executive order for the most part of saying, hey, what we want to do is people making under 125,000 as an individual or 250,000 as a married couple. If there's certain like federal loans out there for student loans, we will take away $10,000. We'll forgive that. And, if you're like a Pell Grant, I think is what it was called. They'll forgive 20,000. But recently I was just reading and it popped into my mind, being a Minnesotan, is in certain states, and Minnesota is included, their legislation isn't necessarily like in parity with the federal government right now. So unless there's legislation passed before this forgiveness comes or before the end of this tax year happens, Minnesota will be taxing that $10,000 forgiveness as income. So you will actually be taxed on that amount forgiven. So obviously having your loan forgiven is very nice if you're in that situation. But to keep in mind and not to like overspend or try to like outspend that stuff, there have to be some money set aside that will have to be put towards your taxes. So if it was something where legislation isn't passed by the end of the year and you're kind of spending the way you normally would, and at the end of the year there's a tax bill, that's probably where it'd be coming from.
Yeah, so it's definitely something to think about, right, Drew? Because especially here in Minnesota, we are subject to that tax, at least currently. And I think my approach to anything when it comes to the government and legislation is to always plan for what's in place today. And then you can always hope for things to change in your favor if that's the way you want to go. So today, obviously, you would be taxed if you were in the situation where you got student loans forgiven. So I think what you do is you just plan accordingly and say you have all $10,000 forgiven. And I forget exactly how the math works out, but let's just say that you have like a $500 to $1,000 tax bill coming up because of it. Well, I think now is a great time. I mean, we've got September, October, November, December. We've got 4 months plus. You have January until you file the taxes to start saving that money so you can plan ahead. And the best thing, Drew, is if they do change the legislation to say, hey, you know what? We're not going to tax the student loan forgiveness. Well, now all of a sudden you've got $1,000 or however much money you have in your pocket, and maybe you're beefing up your emergency fund, or maybe you can just use that money wherever you see fit. Maybe you can celebrate a little bit because you got some student loans forgiven, or maybe you're completely debt free, or maybe you take that $500 to $1,000 and you put that towards your loans to pay them off faster. But regardless of what you do with that money, it's a great opportunity right now to start planning for that tax bill, because at least currently it's going to happen unless something happens in the legislation and the law changes.
Yeah, well, I think saying, setting that money aside right now, I think is very, like, it's such a good idea. And especially, we talked about these emergency funds so often in this podcast. This would be a great time where, like, you'd hope that legislation would change, but there's no promise of that actually happening. And if all of a sudden you were setting this money aside, and you've never thought you had a chance for having an emergency fund, that's like such a great start. And I think that would be like the best case scenario. But all in all, it is something to keep your eye out for the end of the year. I can't remember exactly what it was, but I remember this happened with Minnesota again, and happened with Minnesota in the past, and they never did change the law. So I wish I could remember what it was right now. But even though you're looking at Minnesota as a government or state government that is in a surplus for their tax revenue, it's not a for sure. So it is something that we would like to plan accordingly for if you're in that situation where you'd have that $10,000 forgiven.
I can't imagine though that they wouldn't make the change. Again, we've talked in the last couple of episodes, even before this forgiveness came out, around like this being a political play, right? Where you're going to have potentially a political party say, "Hey, actually, we're not going to tax this," you know, all praise this party or whatever it is, right? And so it would be looked pretty down upon if all of a sudden they're like, "Actually, no, we're going to tax the student loan forgiveness that we've been lobbying for, that we've been, having a part of our message." So I think it's going to get, taken away from the tax code, or, tax free forgiveness, but you can't plan for that. We'll see how things play out. But I think that your best bet is just to plan accordingly right now.
And I should look into this more, but I believe the Minnesota legislation is it's out of session right now, and I don't think it's going back into session by the end of the year. So, in my thoughts, is it would be something where legislation wouldn't change this year. They would have you put your tax dollars into the fund and pay for it,
Right.
and then they change legislation next year. So they want to take your money now and use it to do things with, and then refund you after they've made some interest on it.
I
Is
could
kind of
definitely
what
see
my thought.
something like that playing out.
I could see that. Yeah, that's kind of what my thought is going towards that. And my mind kind of starts wandering too. This loan forgiveness. If this would have happened where they said we're just going to forgive everything, and say you had 100,000 or $300,000 in loan forgiveness, and then you had a
Yeah.
tax bill for like that, saying you made that much
Yeah.
income, where would people come up with that money? You just have to be like on a huge payment plan. You get your
Basically.
loans taken away, but then you still be on a payment plan to to pay for that tax bill for probably the next two,
Right.
3 years.
Yeah, especially because if you talk about like 100, $200,000, like obviously you're bumped way up in the tax bracket.
Yeah.
And so you're going to be owing more taxes. And don't get me wrong, the IRS is someone I never want to be indebted to, because that is super scary, because they can actually just take your wages and all
Yeah.
that. And
Or
so,
your
yeah,
property.
exactly. So it'd be very interesting. Granted, obviously that did not play out that way. Um, but it could
It's
in the
something to
future.
think
Who's to
about.
say? Yeah.
Something to think about. So I guess that kind of brings me on to like the second point I was looking at in the tax stuff, and
Yeah.
uh, this kind of piggybacked onto it, where in your 2019 and 2020 tax returns, if you filed those late, or say you're in a situation where you even haven't filed them yet, I would say get that done as soon as you can, because right now for your 2019 and 2020 tax returns, they are waiving your failure to file penalty. So if you got like a letter from the IRS saying, "Hey, you didn't file your tax return, you're going to have an X amount of dollar penalty for this, and every month you don't pay, it's going to go up like 5%. I think it's up to a max of 25%. I think of that penalty. But so right now they will just be waiving that. So if you had that penalty for your 19 or 20 tax return and you did pay it in, they claim that what they're going to be doing is automatically refunding you that money, and they're estimating about $1.2 billion that will be refunded back to the taxpayer that paid in for that filing fee, or that filing penalty. And if you got the notice saying there was a failure to file penalty and you didn't pay yet, then it'll just get waived and you won't have to worry about that. And it looks like they want to get this done by the end of September here. We'll see what actually comes about it, but they're saying that the IRS right now has such a backlog of just paperwork and tax returns, and with this, what's happened in the last couple of years and they've extending these tax due dates and everything, they have more tax returns and paperwork than they know what to do with. So it sounds like right now they're trying to cut their losses for the 19 and 20 to catch up to the 21 returns, and now it's going to be 22 returns. And so that's something to look out for if you're in that situation where you're really worried you got this penalty for that. It is something to look out for and know that they are going to be waiving that. But if you were to have to pay estimated taxes in and you got a failure to pay penalty, those ones will not be waived. So you might want to consult with your tax accountant on that situation.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add in here because I'm a person that pays their taxes and files their taxes every single year by the tax date. But I think it's a big win for those people, especially like if you think back of 19 and 20 when the pandemic hit, and you're talking like people that usually file for extensions are probably like entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, small business owners, people that are, were pretty much affected by the pandemic and the lockdowns and whatnot. And so it's a pretty big win that they're going to get some of this money back because of the penalties that went into the extensions and all of that. So it's a huge win for the taxpayer. Like I said, it doesn't impact me, and I don't even really know how many people it would necessarily impact in my life. But obviously, $1.2 billion is a lot of money that's going back into the hands of people. And most likely, like I said, it's going to be small business owners, entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, things like that. And so that's really cool. That's a big win, and it also gets the IRS to start pumping out more of those tax returns. I know there's people out there that do wait on their tax refunds, and even that has been delayed, right? Because if you're just filing by paper, if there's some complications, you might not get that refund in a timely manner. So all of it's a big win, all in all. Taxpayers are getting their money back. Big fan of that. And you're getting catch up on the IRS, and so people are going to start getting their tax processed faster. So I don't know. That's all I got to say to that. So it's pretty cool.
If I can add anything into there too, is part of that part of this backlog too, which I found very interesting, is stimulus checks.
Yeah.
So before these stimulus checks got sent out, somebody knew something somewhere, like these scam artists, and they took people's social security numbers and they filed these returns for people.
Okay.
And so when people actually went to file their 22 or their 2021 tax returns, they said your return's already been filed. So if they had like
Really?
somebody e-file or something, say already been
Yeah.
filed, they're like, that's not right. So then
Interesting.
they'd have to send a paper file in. So with them sending the paper file in, it takes much longer to the IRS.
Right.
And then they have to send a correspondence saying, hey, I never received my my first, my second, or my third stimulus checks, or maybe they got one of them, or maybe only one of them was missing, because these people that were scam artists would take their social security numbers, file the
Yeah.
return with a bank account on that. And then what
Oh,
the IRS was doing, saying, all right, there's their most recent return. This is their bank account. We're just automatically send money in
yeah.
there. So not only was it like these paperwork backlogs with all these filing extensions, but the stimulus checks, I think, was probably one of the biggest things that really backed it up, because there's all these false tax returns that were getting sent out there.
Interesting.
A lot of
Yeah.
this money got sent into the wrong hands. So I don't think you're probably taking the money back once it got sent to these bank accounts. So like whatever
Yeah,
money
for
was
sure.
sent out for the stimulus, there's probably a pretty significant amount on top of that was just getting sent back out to the correct people.
Wow. I've never actually heard that.
Mm-hmm.
Which is wild because
It's
you're right. Once it hits a bank account, like for the most part, they're probably withdrawing that and running. So
Yep. So I found that like really interesting. I didn't think like people were gonna like have that issue, or like people like I don't know how scam artists can figure that stuff out before like it's like pretty
yeah,
much right when legislation, or like whenever somebody says something like that's what's happening, they know how to
right.
get right on top of it. They know how to use that identity theft to just go about
Interesting.
and get their money. So there's probably a lot of
Yeah.
stimulus checks that went to the wrong people. And what's crazy now too is like the IRS is so backlogged. So when people send in correspondence saying I never got my or I never got my stimulus check, but then the IRS will come back and say, you did look at your transcripts. We sent it to your bank account. And then you have
Yeah,
to send back saying, nope, it wasn't my bank account. And then it's like a back and forth there. And so, like, that really backed up the IRS huge
yeah,
too. So there's all this paperwork going in. You won't do as many electronic returns because there's so many false ones. So that they had a huge stack of just.
interesting.
Yep, I read the numbers in the article and uh, shoot, I wish I remember what it. Man, I should have brought some more actual data to this one, but pretty significant amount
Regardless,
was.
it's an interesting
Yeah.
fact. I'm gonna actually have to look up and read on it because
Hmm.
I feel like that I would have saw that come across at some point in time, but obviously it's the first time that I'm hearing it. So
Yeah, you don't.
scammers are crazy. They will get creative in any given way. It's pretty wild. I don't know if you know this, Drew, but I've won more Walmart giveaways in the last like 3 months.
Yeah, or you've lost a bunch of Amazon packages.
Yeah. I just got one of those text messages today. Your Amazon account has been hacked. Well, I don't know if you know this, but I don't have an Amazon account to get hacked. So I don't know who you're trying to scam here.
But definitely the wrong person.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then I guess that can bring us into our third little tax little deal just to think about or potentially plan about because we're about planning on this podcast. And um for was it is it the governor of Minnesota?
Yeah.
There's
Yep.
this Jensen that's running, and it's not trying to get political in here. I'm just saying like what is people are running for. And one of the things he proposed was taking away the income tax for Minnesota.
Yeah.
And I found that very interesting because you hear of all these states without income tax, and you're like, oh, I wish I could just like move there. But then you kind of see them
Yeah.
like most of your tax money gets washed out anyways. And I guess my only really thoughts on that is I think it'll be probably pretty difficult for him to get in as governor in Minnesota because it's a pretty blue state.
Yeah.
Um, once you're in there, if the rest of like everybody else in like the legislation is going to be more blue, getting anything passed is going to be really difficult, is my
Yeah.
thought. And then when it comes to taxes, especially in Minnesota, when we've been so reliant on the income tax, we tend to be in a surplus. Like to get a tax bill passed is even more daunting. Like
Right.
for
Right.
some reason, like tax reform is probably one of the hardest things you see in the government. And I think you've seen a couple of them in like the last year, but they're nothing monumental, I don't believe. And switching Minnesota from an income tax state to one of
Yeah.
the highest income tax states to no income tax is pretty crazy. And from what I've read, there's really no plan there
Right.
that he has right now. But maybe he could. But I think all I want to do is really just bring up that that was one thing he's running on. Personally, for me, if it could be like an income tax free state, I would like that because most of the time it would go towards a sales tax
Right.
revenue
Yeah.
maker
I mean, they have to have taxes somewhere, right? You've got to have
somewhere.
revenue coming into the government.
And like I'm more on that. If it's
Yeah.
a sales tax, it seems more of like a flat tax and it's more of a consumption tax. So
Right.
if you have to tighten back like your spending, you're not
Hmm.
putting as much into your taxes.
Yeah. No, this one's an interesting one. I mean, it's hard not to get political when it comes to these, proposed legislations. We'll try to keep it apolitical as possible, I suppose. You did a great job, I will say. But I think my biggest thing is like, it's lofty, right? He's trying to get in. I don't see it ever happening in Minnesota. And I don't honestly see that type of drastic change happening in any state. While you were talking, Drew, I was just looking up what the tax brackets are in Minnesota here because I couldn't remember off the top of my head. But the lowest is 5.35% and it goes up to 9.85%. So almost 10%. And to go from, 5.35 almost up to 10% to zero, that's huge, right? And I think what we were talking before this podcast is that Minnesota is like roughly 50% of our revenue is due to the state income tax. So to eliminate that, there's going to have to be a lot of levers pulled to either offset it, like you said, with sales tax, or to reduce spending in other areas, which, you can argue for and against depending on your political views. But man, to say like, okay, we're going to zero the state income tax from where we're at, I just think it's super lofty. And like you said, even if he gets elected, getting through all the hoops of the, Congress and all that, it's pretty far out there. Um, I don't know if you can really plan for anything, right? Because like I said earlier in the podcast, you kind of just plan for what there is now. But yeah, if there's no state income tax, I mean, that's going to leave more money in your pocket to invest, more money to spend where you want, specifically when there would be an increase in sales tax, or tax added to clothing, because we don't have that in Minnesota, and things like that.
Yeah, as you brought up the point of like Minnesota's like tax revenue base pretty much come like a little over 50% comes from the income tax, and what in the article I was reading, it was almost all the other states that have that income tax, they have like roughly it's like 35%, I believe, of their revenue, or quote unquote revenue, coming from the actual income tax. So as we're talking about daunting, I mean, not only are we fairly high as an income tax, we're but we're not only like and like not only very reliant on that income tax, but like we're one of the highest, if not, I think we are the highest in the entire country. So to be able to cut that to nothing and to switch over, like you saying, pulling the levers is something else would be very daunting. There'd have to be very, very detailed plan, and to get people on board for that.
I just love these
I'm not
political aspirations,
I'm not
Drew.
a smart enough guy. I'm not a smart enough guy to get that stuff passed through,
Yeah.
but I'm sure somebody can go on there and do that.
It's wild to me when people they just throw out the farthest like best case scenario in their political views, and they're it's like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. We know it's never happening. Everyone knows it's not happening,
But it's a
but that
negotiating tool.
exactly. So it's you start far and you kind of come in. So
Yeah.
what I could foresee happening, if I'm going to use my, my crystal ball here, if he gets elected, and obviously the rest of the governing body has to adjust accordingly for him to be able to get legislation through, I could foresee a reduction in the state income tax for sure. Maybe there's
Yeah.
like a flat tax or something like happened with the tax cut in 2017 by the Trump administration. Something like that is definitely reasonable. To
Yeah.
zero to say, yeah, I don't buy that at all, and I wouldn't vote on that specifically. But I could see some middle ground, flat tax, maybe a reduction in the tax brackets that we have now. I'm not really sure, but I could
Yeah.
foresee that. That could be actually something I could
Yeah. I could foresee
see.
some type of a cutback for sure coming. And the reason I say that is just with Minnesota running in a surplus all the time, like there has to be a point where the taxpayer has to be able to see that. And I think you could run enough of a campaign to argue to get people to vote behind, saying like, don't you want more money in your pocket? And it's like, I think it's really hard to see governments cutting spending, but if you're in a surplus, I think you could be able to cut that revenue a little bit.
I totally agree. The surplus thing is interesting because it's all forecasting, right? So when they say like Minnesota's in a surplus, that's true, but it's because like the forecasts were just off. Whether that's like more people were added to the there more taxpayers were added to the population, or people are just making more money, or whatever it was, which is, as an actuary, that forecast would be incredibly hard to forecast the tax base. So I don't ever want that type of job. But it's a quite an interesting thing if you guys are like interested into figuring out like or finding out like how we run a surplus. It's just because forecasting is super hard, and we're tax tied. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say
Yeah.
we're not, but it is based on forecasting, which is incredibly challenging.
Yeah.
Kind of
So
interesting as someone that likes that kind of stuff.
no, I think it'd be extremely difficult to do and everything, but I think, for the most part of right now, just wanted to bring that up just to get it in people's minds of just some of that stuff that's happening right now. I just don't I don't really watch much news on TV anymore. Uh and I think in Twitter sometimes you probably get in your own little echo chamber, so you only see things that you want to see. And, for that, when I end up seeing things or I'm part of certain newsletters that say items, I think it's just nice to be able to bring it up on this podcast and let people know, because I really, on my Twitter and stuff or social medias, I haven't seen anything about Minnesota taxing that loan forgiveness. And it was actually from like a more newsletter from like a financing that that actually came in. So I think that was one thing I really wanted to bring up. And then I know with all of those Social Security hacks for tax returns and all these filing fees, uh, I think there's that waiver of just giving some people a little more peace of mind, or if they could even bring it up to their accountant if they had that, saying like, "This is what I heard. Can you just double check with it?" So I think those are just things I really want to bring up. And then the income tax one is just a fun one to talk about. I
Right.
really think just bringing that up, whether it happens or not, probably not. But
Yeah.
I think it's fun one to talk about, because personally, I would love no income tax
Well,
in
we always
Minnesota.
talk,
But
right? We always say that, not on the podcast. I
yeah,
guess that this is the first, but we always say in person, like, if we're gonna move anywhere, it's going to a place where they don't tax you on
yeah,
income. Like that is like a dream, and
yeah,
I think we're both on that same page. I will go
absolutely.
on the record saying that I don't mind paying income tax as long as it's used correctly, and it's used smartly and responsibly. So you can argue if that's actually happened or not, but yeah, I think we're both on board with let's get more money in our pockets and let us decide what we're going to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, any retweets of the week for you?
Let's see here. Yeah, I had one that was at least interesting to share for this podcast. Um, It's by a username that I don't even know who they are, but it's a Gurgavin. So Gurgavin, Gurgavin. And he said it was an image. And it said Saudi Aramco, which is a publicly traded oil and gas company, made more money than Apple, Microsoft, Facebook, and Tesla did combined in the last quarter. So Tesla, Meta, Facebook, Apple and Microsoft made $45 billion last quarter, so Q2, and then um, Saudi Aramco made 48 billion, so 3 billion more in profits, which to me was just wild because not again, all of this gets into like that political spectrum, but like you saw like gas prices rising, and then you see these companies making massive profits. Like, dang, like there's something in the books there. Like there's something happening behind the scenes for whatever reason it actually is. But
I
it's
I
wild
just
to me that they made so much.
I just rewatched the Enron
Yeah.
smartest guys in the room, I think is
Yep.
what it's called, documentary.
It's a
Great.
heck of a show. I'm
I
not gonna
really
lie.
it's a
Heck of a
great
show.
documentary. And you in there they show like how they pretty much created this energy commodity market, and how easily it was able to be manipulated. And like you see how energy prices have gone lately, and you just like wonder, like that manipulation probably never changes. Like Enron ended up getting, you know, scapegoated out of there, or they got caught, I guess. So like they are, but like obviously it's still going on with like the way these prices for energy goes. Like gas prices don't follow inflation rates. Like you could have inflation through 20, 30 years, and you can have somebody with some supply and demand to decide like, all right, gas prices are going to be cheaper than they were 30 years ago. And but then they can be more like twice the 2, 3, 4 times the price of inflation. I think that's interesting. And then like you hear in California, they don't, you know I think they're saying, oh yeah, we're going to put a bill through so you can't have any gas powered cars by the year 2036, or you can't sell them. And then like the day later they say, oh, because of widespread blackouts, we don't want you to do electric cars. And then it's just like, I mean, this energy market just constantly manipulated. And then the fact that they can just like make more than all of these innovative technological companies combined in a quarter is wild.
I mean, if you play with the numbers a little bit, those companies were down just based on the current environment, but still it's wild that the top four tech stocks basically made less than this gas company, gas and oil. So it just shows you that, like, you hear it all the time, right? Like, people get blamed for gas prices, and it's like, well, it's not the people, it's the gas companies, it's the actual, just this ecosystem we exist within that drives supply and demand, and the levers that get pulled.
I don't know enough about the oil industry, and I don't think I ever will.
Yeah.
But I can tell you one thing right now: it doesn't make any sense to me. Like
Yeah.
for the fact that like a diesel is more expensive than like unleaded, that's more refined and like filtered, from what I believe is like crazy. The fact that it doesn't like ever really follow inflation is like
Yeah.
crazy. The
Yeah.
fact that like if the barrel goes up, prices will go up the day of, but then they slowly come down because they say they have to keep it high to pay for the cost of like what they actually bought it for.
Yeah.
But they don't like keep it low for the price that they bought it
Right.
for before.
Right.
So it's like I don't know enough about the oil
There's got to be
industry.
a good book out there that just like breaks it down that I need to get my hands on.
If I read anything on that, I know my brain would hurt and it would get so much more complex the further I went down
Yeah.
that rabbit hole, that like you'd have to spend like your whole life, I think, just studying oil and
Oh,
gas type
I'm
stuff
sure. I'm
just to
sure.
get.
Yeah, I know there's a Seyfedin Amos, I forget how you pronounce his last name, but he wrote the Bitcoin Standard, and he talks a lot about energy. Obviously, as a Bitcoin guy, maybe that's not so obvious to some people, but energy is huge, right, in the Bitcoin movement. And because, one, they say Bitcoin's bad because it uses so much energy, but the anti-argument is that, well, energy, anything that's worthwhile needs energy, and so Bitcoin needs energy, and it's a good use of energy. I'm going down a rabbit hole, so let me back up a little bit. But he has recommended a couple like books, so maybe I'm gonna have to go back and listen to some episodes of his podcast and see what kind of energy books he talks about, because I need to understand like why it's all crazy all the time, and it makes no sense, the fluctuation and the volatility of gas prices specifically.
Yeah, yeah, no, it would be, if you find a good book, you let me know because it'll be really interesting.
Definitely. You got one for this week?
But yeah,
Retweet?
on a lighter note, nothing to do with finance, but the reason I think about it kind of for a finance podcast is there was a graph associated with it. So if anybody's been
Nice.
watching any entertainment news lately, they've been seeing that Leonardo
Yep.
DiCaprio, whatever.
The Titanic guy.
Yeah, he broke up with this 25-year-old girl like the day she like pretty much she turned 25, and there's like this joke that he doesn't date anybody over the age of 25, and they had some graph and it was all these girlfriends ages of when he broke up with them, and then it shows his age and they're all like under 25.
Yeah.
So there was somebody that tweeted out, it must have been from that House of Dragon, that new Game of Thrones show, of
Yeah.
this girl throwing this baby into the fire and it going crazy, and it's like, this is Leonardo, this is Leo after his girl turns 25, his girlfriend turns 25. So I thought it was kind of funny, and it's like kind of relevant. It's if
Yeah.
anybody listening to this podcast and knows anything about it, they're probably thinking this is late to the game, but hey, I retweeted that back on August 30th, so I'm still on top of the game.
Yeah. It's true though. I know I've seen a couple comedians when they've held like I don't even know all the major things, like the Golden Globes, the Emmys, the Oscars, things like that. And they've made jokes about Leonardo DiCaprio and his very young
Yeah,
girlfriends. So that's quite funny. Uh, is it something that we can show? Is it appropriate?
sure. I mean, it's on Twitter and everything.
We'll put it on there. We'll put it on the video feed. Drew, just send it over to me and I'll get it into the YouTube
Okay.
feed. So if you're listening to this and you want to check out that meme, head over to YouTube. I'll put it in the timestamps. I have what's going on, or retweet of the week. So just check it out
All
there.
right.
And we're
I
in.
just DM'd you
Nice.
the link. So
Perfect. So we'll get that in there.
this weekend, Cav and I went to the state fair together, and
The annual Nori Stack Pool State Fair run. Well,
yeah,
it's
we have to
not
think of a
annual
good.
for the ever, but we missed a couple of years there. But that's okay. We'll still
But we
count
were
it.
meaning to go.
Yes. And one of those years isn't our fault. It was the pandemic and it was
Yeah.
canceled. So it was really
So
only
I
one year we missed.
I think we need to think of a catchy name. Maybe get some T-shirts.
some some matching T-shirts. I
Yeah.
love it.
Uh, but the one thing that just really bums me out about the whole deal is with us being from Virginia, Minnesota,
Yeah.
we have the Land of the Loon Festival, where this
Yep.
big loon
Yep.
comes through the town, and then it's like time when it goes into this lake that we have in the middle of the city. And it went down to the state fair for the first time this year, and we're like, we
Right.
got to go down there, we got to see it. We got back, and this morning I woke up and I turned to my wife. I'm like, we didn't go see the loon. We didn't even go see it up close
What?
or anything. And then, get back on here talking to you. You said you went to the state fair 3 times and you still haven't seen it.
I was just gonna say, how dare you not go see it, Drew? But yeah, I'm even worse. I was there 3 times this week and didn't go see it. And I actually even worse than that, I didn't even think about going to go see it until like I think it was today or yesterday evening that Hannah, my wife, and I were talking. We're like, we never went to see the loon. We had no idea
Yeah.
where it was. We didn't even think about it. So, oh well, we're not true Virginia Minnesotans, I suppose, because we didn't go
It,
see
it did.
the
It didn't
loon.
even. It crossed my mind. Well, I'd say it crossed my mind before we went,
Yeah,
as we were driving there, and the whole time we got there and walking through, it never crossed my mind.
yeah, yeah,
It must have been too much stimulation. Like I was looking for the next cheese curd, or I was
yeah.
looking for those pies, and we found them with a reasonable line, and we said we'd come back later, and the line was outrageous. We never got to them.
All right, Drew. So I got something fun for us that we could do. Top. Let's do top two beers and top two foods that we both had. So, what was your? Let's go top two beers. What were your top two beers?
Um,
You don't got much time to think here, man. We're running on a clock.
I know I didn't really have much. I think I had like 4 beers all the time. So we had a Third Street
Yeah, and
Hanger
you didn't
Honey, I
even
think.
they weren't all State Fair beers, were they? Didn't you get a
No,
couple just like random like
I got a summer shandy out one of them.
yeah,
So it was the
but
Third
it was
Street.
a State Fair summer shandy.
Yeah, that's right. Is a Hanger Honey. What was the next one? Which I can't remember what there was. No, what do you
Where
got?
at the
There's some.
hangar?
What
Must
we
not have
got
been
that?
that good.
No, it was that one. So that one to try. That was fine.
Yeah.
Oh, and then I got a mango blonde, Lifford's mango blonde, a summer shandy, and then
Nice.
it was a Shell's like grain belt lemon
Oh
lemon.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
that's supposed to be a lemon shandy too. So now they have those there.
And you said that
Uh,
wasn't that good, right? Like it was
so
like okay.
if I can't, if I cancel out the ones that you can buy in the store, then that kind of leaves me with the two other ones, which were like whatever. But I'm a big mango blonde, Lifford's
Love a
mango
mango
blonde guy,
blonde.
so
Yeah.
I love that. And summer shandy, I actually really like that too. So I wasn't even like on the state fair side of things, but
Yeah.
this is my thought. If Lifford's mango blonde was not sold to stores and everything,
Okay.
and summer shandy was not sold to stores and everything, but you could only get it at the state fair, people would have the longest
Fair.
lines for that because they
Fair.
know that's
Fair.
a great tasting beer.
I would for sure get the mango because that is probably like a top 5 beer of mine of all time. I love that beer. Summer Shandy is pretty good too. I really only like it when it's like super hot out, but I will have it from now and again when it's not. But Drew, as someone that actually did try quite a few state beers over my 3 days that I was there, I gotta say that the Shell's Blue with the frozen topper kicks it out of the park. It's my number one. I was telling my cousin that I've got two go tos, that and then the pies that they have, the deep fried pies. So those two.
Yeah.
But so the Shell's Blue with the frozen topper
Yep.
was by far the best beer that I had at the state fair. And then I tried a few other ones, but again, the mini donut beer
It's a
is
class. That's a staple there.
it's just a staple at the ballpark. When you get there, you're at the state fair because it's got the like nice sugary rim. It's not like the
Yep.
greatest beer, but I think just like the sugar around the rim, it tastes kind of like a mini donut. Plus, it's like an exclusive to the state fair. Just the atmosphere of it
Yeah.
puts it to number two easily.
It's just the supply and demand of it.
But I will say I did try yeah, I did try a lot of other newer state beer brews and I just was not impressed with a lot of them, to be
Yeah,
honest.
I know my wife really wanted to do that, like caramel green apple
Yeah.
seltzer or whatever. But the line was the longest line I've ever seen in my entire life, and we were not waiting in that line for a beer. So
Yeah.
she didn't get to try that, but I saw a lot of people walking with that. Looked pretty good. Outside of the beers,
Yeah, so
food
now top
wise,
2 foods.
I I really like the deep fried olives. That's always up there for me.
Yeah.
And then another food would have the crab fritters. Those are like meh. I didn't have a pronto pup, so I can't say much on that. I didn't have that pie when the whole time I wanted the blueberry pie, and I can't believe I didn't get it. Uh, what else did we get?
You were
Yeah,
talking up that was like your one thing you wanted to get was a
I know,
blueberry deep fried pie, and you made multiple comments throughout the entire day.
and I never got it. I didn't get the corn on the cob, which we were looking for. Uh,
Jeez,
we didn't get
rough,
the
rough going this year.
Yeah, we got sweet Martha's. Is that what it's
Yeah, the
called? We got
cookies,
those cookies. Those are pretty
always a good,
good. So we got
always
those,
good.
but those
Yeah.
deep fried olives are pretty tasty. I have to say I like those a lot. And then I would say those Mousetrap cheese
Ooh, cheese
curds.
curds. Yep.
Yeah, I'm a big cheese guy.
I mean, I feel like you're a deep fried ravioli guy. Like your stops
Oh,
are always deep fried raviolis right next to the deep fried olives. So you get the
that's right.
raviolis, you eat them while you're in line for the olives, and then you get the
This kind
olives.
of sounds bad saying I really liked those because I forgot to mention them, but I do really like those there. I get
Yeah.
the cheese ones and like they are just tasty. Like a deep fried ravioli just
When I had one, I the cheese like squirted out onto my finger, and I got an actual blister from the cheese. That was, and like you guys were eating them just like no problem, and I'm like, how the heck can you guys eat this stuff? Because I
it just gave
literally
me a
have a
blister.
blister on my finger.
Tough mouth.
I don't care how tough your mouth is; it's like burning skin hot.
Just
I will
uh
say though, my top two, uh, Pronto Pup, huge Pronto Pup, way better than a corn dog. Fight me on it. Don't care. I will go to my deathbed on that one. Number two, deep fried pumpkin pie. So good.
yeah, you got one of the pies.
I got two. Like I said, I went 3 times. 2 of the days I got the pie. It
Did
was,
you go
and I
back
was
last
gonna do
night?
the blueberry because it's new this year, but the pumpkin pie was just so good. I had to get it again.
You got it last night.
Yeah, I got it my first time.
There
Then I got
there
it last
there
night.
wasn't a bad line. Well, you
There
guys
was a
stayed for
line,
like
but it was
12
probably like,
hours.
yeah. I was there way too long yesterday, but I got out of there before
Yeah.
all of the crap that went down. So good on me, I suppose. But the line wasn't that bad. It was like a probably like 15-20 minute line, and it was like our last stop as we were going to the car. So it was a good way to end the state fair.
Yeah, I walked out. We didn't eat anything. Baby was crying. He was still sick. I said go to the bathroom, and
Yeah.
then we just like got out of there.
Yeah.
Our parking spot wasn't too bad. I mean, we had to pay like $40 for a parking spot, but we were like right across the street, which is kind of cool. It's like a bunch of people
We
in like in their yards.
we had the best luck this year with the state fair. So like we went 3 times. I feel like I've said that 1,000 times at this point.
You
But
said it 3 times. Just kidding.
we we got free parking all 3 times within like a half-mile distance. We've got 4 free tickets. So we like were rolling this year when it came to the state fair. I
Yeah,
was fired up.
state fair on like nice discounted coupon budget.
It literally was like we ran the numbers of like what we spent at the fair, and it was like crazy low compared to what we normally would spend. Like what we spent in 3 days was probably equivalent to what we would have spent in a day any other year, which is wild.
That makes it worth it going. Then you don't have to feel guilty for not seeing everything for one time. You just get to go a couple
Yeah.
times. So
I would say the sweet spot is to do like a half day and then a full day. I think would be the sweet spot because then
okay,
you're like that first day you're not if you don't feel guilty not getting something that you want, and you can kind of like mosey around, be like, oh, I'll get that next time. You can kind of game plan and strategize. And then on the full day, you can like get what you didn't get on that half day. But,
I like it.
maybe next year we'll have a pre-state fair episode around how to save money at the state fair, how to
I think that'd be.
maximize your dollar.
I think that'd be a good one. Next year we can do the before and after the state fair, a before belly pitcher and after belly pitcher. What to do with your wallet. But yeah, anyways, I think that can wrap up this week's episode.
And I think we lost Drew. So, with that being said, we'll just wrap up this episode. Hopefully, you guys liked the conversation around some of the tax implications or tax things that you should be thinking about when it comes to student loans and potential future tax changes. Also, go check out the state fair next year if you don't get down there. It is absolutely a great weekend, or 9 days actually. It's a heck of a lot of fun. They have a lot of good food and drinks. But with all that being said, go check us out on YouTube. If you don't subscribe, we'd really, really appreciate that. Give us a like to this video if you found value in it. Also, drop us a comment on future things that you would like, future topics you would like to hear about, or if anything in this, if you have any opinions on the topics in this episode, let us know. Also, drop us a review out on Apple Podcasts. 5-star goes a long way, and a review goes a long way to help us push out this podcast to more and more people. So with that all being said, we appreciate you guys tuning in again this week in the Neighborhood Money, and we'll see you next week in the neighborhood.